Hi, welcome to our virtual luncheon meeting. We want to welcome all of our Fresno County and City Republican Women Federated, our members, our associate members, and our guests. We are glad you are here with us on Facebook. And we want to introduce to you Tulare County Sheriff Mike Boudreaux, who has agreed to be our speaker of sorts for this meeting. We're just going to have a conversation about the things that are going on across the country, but also locally and in the state of California. So again, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Sheriff, for agreeing to do this with us, our first video interview for our meetings. But we thank you again for agreeing to participate with us.
Yeah, no, I'm very thankful. I appreciate it.
Well, let's just dive right in.
Okay.
Obviously, we actually intended to have you with us in person at our April luncheon, and everybody knows why we haven't been able to do that. But tell us from your perspective in law enforcement as a sheriff, what the lockdowns from the coronavirus pandemic have been like in your interactions, not just with your sheriff's department here, but even with the community at large.
Well, as you know, this is a challenging, unprecedented time for us all. Everyone is searching for answers of some sort, and the answers just never seem to come. And just when we begin to see some advancements or some balances, we see another rush of disappointing information that comes all the way from Sacramento. And I think the hard part for all of us is that, is the data believable? And for us here in Tulare County, we have high numbers, but what we've done with the county health director, we've been very aggressive in our testing. We have targeted the areas that would be at risk, most at risk. And so we're in our nursing homes, we're in our care provider homes, that type of thing. And so our numbers went way up. But what's not being reported, and I think is equally as important, is that we have the highest number of recoveries as well. And so we have close to or over 6,000 positive tests here in Tulare County, but we're close to 4,000 recovered cases.
Wow.
And so that's never reported. And so the challenge becomes, for me specifically in law enforcement, is that do we, based on the data, go on to an enforcement effort? You know, do we wear a mask? Do we not wear a mask? The governor is given directive. Do we follow the governor's order? Do we not follow the governor's order? There becomes questions of constitutionality and is it a law? Is it not a law?
Right.
And so what I've done here, and to some chagrin to some, and others are in support, is I don't enforce the mask rule,
Right.
the mask law. I don't think it's the way to go to good law-abiding citizens.
Right.
But I do think that if this is the effort we're going to take, then let's give an educational approach. And so that's what I've done, is we've provided flyers in several different languages that talk about the information regarding COVID and the importance of masks. And we're providing free masks to anyone who wants to wear them, but we're not enforcing them, we're not forcing them to wear those masks. And so then the political dilemma between all that is that you have those who believe I, as the sheriff, are mandated to enforce those rules based on the governor's order. And the reality of it is that's in fact not the case, because the governor's order is one that follows the state health director, and it falls under state of an emergency. Now, because there's a state of an emergency, there is a health code that allows us to give a citation for that. But is that truly the way we want to go for our good law-abiding citizens? And so the heartache that I have, we're releasing thousands of inmates from state prison. I personally, here at Tulare County Jail, we average 1,800 inmates a day. We can house 1,800 inmates easily, but because of the zero bail, because of the court orders, we're below 1,000 people in our jail. So then you take a look at the data, and what does that mean? So we ended up having 15 or so positive tests for inmates in our jail. All 15 inmates have recovered, right? All 15, none of which had symptoms.
Wow.
So where is the balance between those who believe we should be citing people for wearing masks, and then the balance between what does the real data provide?
Right.
And so the state continues to give these positive results, which is hard for me as sheriff, because we're not showing the recoveries. We're not showing the gains that we're taking. We're not showing that we are starting to show a decline. The numbers in no way are what they had anticipated them to be. And I think for many of us, we were very tolerable the first 30, 45 days. Right? None of us knew. We said, we're going to be those who, we're going to abide by this. This is very scary for everyone. And we're going to wait and see what the data shows. And so we pulled our kids out of school. We quit going to church. Our workforce, we separated and changed days off so that we could reduce the exposure. And now that we've gotten into several months of this and the data's not supporting that first 30 to 45 days, many of us have a difficult time swallowing truth versus fact versus maybe what is all smoke and mirrors.
Right.
And I think for many of us, there's a fear there that if we believe it's smoke and mirrors, but then yet there's a huge death toll, oh my gosh, right? So the balance for politicians and elected officials are, let's weigh on the side of caution just in case. For me, the challenges are, we have several inmates that have been released from prison. We have many of those inmates in state prison coming back to Tulare County, coming back to Fresno County, coming back into the San Joaquin Valley, who are master criminals.
Right.
Likely haven't rehabilitated themselves, and so we as law enforcement are going to have to deal with that. I'm releasing inmates from my jail that have been arrested for child abuse or elder abuse, didn't complete their full sentences. And so what we don't hear is the victim. Where are our victims? Justice is important. And when we're focusing on the release of a known criminal, and we've ignored the voices of our victims, that's not right.
Right.
And if masks are the answer,
Right.
then why aren't we masking our inmates in jail?
Right.
The prisoners in our prisoner system, they should be wearing masks and isolated for 14 days. 14, 21 days. We're told, as citizens, stay home, quarantine yourself for 14 days, wear masks. We're doing it.
Right.
Why are we not doing that with our inmate population, our prisoner population?
And you have the capability to do that.
We definitely have the capability to do that. And so, in my case, we had a very good medical plan put together, a robust plan in identifying those who could potentially be impacted by COVID in our prison system. Our jail right now is cleaner than any hospital. We are sanitizing, bleaching, wiping down. We have special machines that help pull bacteria and dirt and grime. And our jails are just as clean as I've ever seen them.
Yeah.
And so even our medical provider, we contract with a medical provider. We go and we speak with them. Do you think we should do more? And they said, this is one of the cleanest jails. And so they're happy. And so because of our plan, we temperature gauge our employees as well as the inmates that come through. And anybody who shows signs or symptoms, they quarantine for 14 days. And we follow all the guidelines.
Right.
But what we don't hear, which is important, those who have recovered.
Right.
So I went from 15 positive tests that hit the news, right? And Margaret has had the same. She's had a much higher elevated impact in her jail. But I would argue many of those in her jail have recovered.
Right.
And mine all have recovered. Now, I don't want anyone to think that I was ignorant in the fact that it couldn't happen to us. We knew that it could happen, but we had a good plan in place.
Right.
And all the sheriffs in the state of California had a great plan in place. So back to your original question, I know I may have gotten a little long-winded, but there's this, how has it impacted us here locally, law enforcement? And so we have a divide. And we're trying to balance that divide in the best reasonable way that we can without arresting good law-abiding citizens when we're releasing known criminals. And that's really difficult for me.
Yeah, that's I think there's a lot of frustration among probably across the country, but certainly here in the Central Valley with that kind of dichotomy of we're releasing these criminals and yet you want to come after me and my personal freedoms. You talked about the kind of misinformation or what they are putting out but what they're not putting out. And I like to tell people, I think you can tell what someone's agenda is by how they tell you about the numbers.
Right.
If they use the numbers, like here's the total number of cases, here are the total number of deaths in this county, they're really trying to instill a bit of concern, I'll be kind, not fear, but if you look at it from percentages, and you realize, I know I saw one report out of Fresno County, which is about 1 million people, and there had been 9,124 positive cases. Well, 9,000 is a big number, but when you realize that's not even like 0.1% of the population, it brings it into a real perspective.
Sure does.
And of that, once you're in that 0.1% of the population who's contracted it, only 91 of those people have unfortunately, tragically passed away. And so that is now a tiny percentage of a tiny percentage, and yet we have what appears to be widespread fear and panic in a community, which can only make it more difficult on those who are trying to serve that community. Whether it's the elected officials, the law enforcement, any of that community, it's like you say, it's putting us at odds because you have people who are concerned and people who are trying to help them, but what's happening in between with the information is very frustrating.
I think that's very well said. It's very well said. And for us here in Tulare County, we have on record just shy of 500,000 people, but we're easily much higher than that. And so of our known cases, we're even less than that. We're 0.02% of the overall population.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to take away from anyone who has lost their lives because
Exactly.
of COVID-19. The lives are, it's important. We don't want to undermine the loss of someone's loved one. I had a friend who actually had died of COVID-19, but he went into the hospital with pneumonia. Okay, and so he contracted COVID-19 in the hospital. Now, the other part of it, I think, for all of us, because I think many of us have had a story or two where they say, wait a minute, I had a family friend who went into the hospital. They didn't have COVID. They had this condition, but they listed it as a COVID death.
Right.
And so the accuracy of data becomes very questionable, especially when we have people who say, hey, I went into the hospital and I refused a COVID-19 test, but then I get a letter in the mail that says I've tested positive. Well, I've somewhat learned that now because of inmates that we had. We had 2 inmates that refused to take the test. We can't force you to do that.
Right.
And they treated them as positive cases. And so is the data accurate? And if we have people that die of cardiac arrest or some type of cancer or other ailment, they have COVID, how are those being calculated?
Right.
And I think all of us question that. And so, again, when we refer back to the first 30 to 45 days, we were all very, hey, we're watching and paying attention. We want our kids safe, we want our elderly safe, we want everyone to be as safe as possible. But now there's a lot of question as to data. And I think I would feel a lot more comfortable if we had more accuracy in the data.
Right.
We talk about science, we talk about data, but now we're beginning to question the information we're being fed.
Yeah. And that doesn't really help anyone.
It doesn't help anyone.
And then, of course, on the heels of the initial round of lockdowns and all of the concerns, we've now had civil unrest across the country.
Yeah.
And now you already have a society that has been kind of pitted against each other now as the people who are trying to figure out what COVID-19 really means to their lives, the people who are trying to serve them, and now we're going to bring them into another clash as we see these riots and protests across the country. And now even a movement to defund the police. How has that, coming on the immediate heels of all of this, affected things here in Tulare County and at the Sheriff's Department?
Well, I can tell you, I'm very vocal. I very much stand my position and make my opinion known. And we might as well talk about the tweet.
Sure, let's talk about your tweet.
We might as well talk about the tweet. So I put a tweet out that became very controversial, but there was a lot of truth within that tweet. And so it said, basically, for those that are hating us right now, let us know you don't want us to come, right? And what I was trying to focus on, and maybe the wording could have been better, but what I was trying to focus on is that the hypocrisy of what was happening. Because law enforcement as a whole, we saw George Floyd in that situation, and all of us gasped.
Right.
We went, this is bad. That guy needs to go to jail. Someone needs to be held accountable. We all agreed with that. But then we had a nation that began to uprise in frustration, and we need to hear those voices. I don't disagree with protest. I don't disagree with the ability to be angry. I don't disagree with you walking the streets in protest. Here's where I had a hard time. We're burning police cars. We're burning police agencies. were shooting and killing law enforcement officers
Right.
all across the country during these protests. That goes far against what the message is. If your message is anti-police violence, but you answer it with death and destruction, it's being a hypocrite.
Right.
And I don't agree with that. And so I vocalized it in a tweet. Now that became very controversial in the fact that they twisted that into meaning a bunch of different things. And so what I tried to take away from that is a learning lesson in, am I hearing? Am I hearing what they're saying? And I believe we were. We listened to the Attorney General come out with a category of different issues in reform for law enforcement, the use of force. And what I was happy to see is that we met all those categories. I think California is some of the best trained law enforcement in the nation and in the world. And one of the issues that we really learned from was Rodney King.
Right.
Now, as a young deputy, I was deployed to the Rodney King riots, and I remember having bottles thrown at me, bricks thrown at me, saying that I was part of the problem. And I was a young cop that just wanted to do right? And so it was very hard for me to listen to that and learn the frustration that, hey, we need to make sure that we're doing things right. And so for California, we began to teach on racial profiling. We began to give classes on racial profiling. We began classes on de-escalation, deconfliction training. We went into use of force and what that level of use of force means. And we've really been doing a good job. And then the other end, Rodney King, is that during that time they were very separated from their community. There was no trust there. And so for here in the Central San Joaquin Valley, I think we do a great job of developing the trust of those who live here. And we have a large group of diverse people here. And so I think if we're going to move forward with any type of reform, I think there is certain levels of reform that can take place, but at the training level. And maybe what some of that means is to the de-escalation training. And if you, for example, what we saw on George Floyd, we don't train that way.
Right.
If there was an officer holding someone down for that amount of time with no one struggling, we trained to intervene, pull the officer away, pull the person up off the ground, dust them off, make sure everyone's okay. And so for us in California, when we saw that, we went, oh my goodness, that's terrible. And so I think there was a lot of frustration in, we're working hard to do what's right. Don't put us in the same category of one officer. But the voices were so angry, and still there's some anger, that when you try to talk about what can we do, there's not a lot of people listening. And let me give you on the tails of when that tweet went out. We had a 17, 19-year-old girl that were putting up signs on one of our local high schools over here, LD Monte High School, and it was in the news, and we were putting all the signs up. And I agree with putting up signs. That's their way to kind of voice their frustration. And so, but two of the signs, one of them said, FUCK the police, and the other one said, kill the police. So someone pulls up, grabs the kill the police sign, throws it in the car, and takes off. What did these two girls do? They called the police, right? So they called the police to say, my sign was stolen. And so the officer, poor guy, says, and what does your sign say?
Yeah.
Well, it said, kill the police. Kill the police, yeah, okay. So for law enforcement, it's very difficult to hear that. And so when I heard that story, plus multiple stories, that was the hint behind my tweet. And when you tell the truth like that, it's very hard to hear. It's very hard to hear. And it clouds the narrative in the direction of what voices are trying to be heard. And so there has to be balance there. We are calming down, it appears, across the country. There still is little areas of fire throughout the country, and we're hoping that begins to die down. But we never want to forget the focus we need to take moving into the future. And we just need to reinforce to our community that, look, we are doing it right. We are hearing you. We do hear what you say. What we did was we invited our community to come in and take our classes. We said, come in and take our use of force class. And I have what's called a community advisory committee, kind of like an oversight committee. And there's a lot of demand for oversight right now, especially when it comes to sheriffs, and I think it's because they're elected positions. But we have an oversight committee that comes in and evaluates what we do as citizens. And so they came in and took our use of force option simulator, which is basically a big video game, and you have a gun that feels real. When it shoots, it feels real. The sound feels, the audio is real. And we put them through that. And we say, look, this is what our officers face. And then we invite them to come along on ride-alongs. Come and ride in the car, see what we're doing. Come and take a look at my budget. Take a look at how we're spending our money. And people say, well, why do you do that? I said, because for one, we have nothing to hide. Two, this is their sheriff's office. And three, we want their input. And so if we can do all those things, we develop that trust, then you'll have a community that supports you in time of unrest.
That's wonderful. I know how troubled it seemed that the first people who jumped out to condemn the situation that led to the death of George Floyd were law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
I heard from a number of different people that no one took that worse than those who knew how terrible it was and reflected on them, unfortunately, like you say. And I think there's been, particularly here in the Central Valley, we are blessed that there is support for law enforcement. I know there's a number of different rallies that have been going on and are going to continue happening that back the blue and support our law enforcement. And so we definitely want to be mindful that not everybody is as fortunate as we are here to have good law enforcement, to have a good community base of support for that. Have any of your officers or that had any connection with any of the areas that have had unrest? I know there have been some areas where additional enforcement forces have come in to assist them or anything like that. Has there been any connection there?
No, fortunately for the sheriff's office, we've been very blessed. We've been very blessed. And I think that may tail into maybe your next question when it talks about defunding.
Right.
We're talking about defunding the police. And so for police officers, we're already undermanned. We're already under budgeted. We're already stretched very thin in providing the services that we provide. And so when I hear defunding the police, it's difficult because during all the protests, during all of COVID-19 masks, we still had crime to fight.
Right.
We still had child pornography cases. We still had sex trafficking cases. We still had gang-related deaths and homicides. We were arresting 3 homicide suspects in a gang-related shooting when they were having protests out on Mooney Boulevard, but yet we were arresting homicide suspects. When you have people saying defund the police, but yet they're the first ones to call the police, because the reality of it is we need our police officers.
Absolutely.
We need our law enforcement. We cannot have tyranny. And what we see is that even for us, we try to get to all of our communities as best we can. If we have one officer that's patrolling a community, he can't be there 24 hours a day. Those bad guys know. They know when we're there. And so if they for one moment thought we were never around, we would have unrest beyond untold measures. Is there a way, and so I hear them changing their language a bit to say that, no, we don't want to defund police, we want to take money and put it in different places, right? Well, that's a change in narrative because defunding is not going to work for America. But we're already on shoestring budgets. And so what does that look like? I do believe our education system is underfunded. I do believe there's a lot of people underfunded. But law enforcement can't be one of those things that we take money from. Only because we live this. I live this. And I take it very personal when we have victims in our county. And when I see human trafficking cases that if you defund the police, they may have to go from 4 detectives to 1 detective. When we have gang-related shootings in a community and I want to send 6 police officers, deputy sheriffs to a scene, and now I'm going to only have 1 or 2 deputy sheriffs. We're already on shoestring budget. And so then you get to the jail system. The jail system requires millions of dollars to operate. We have 5 jails in our county. If you start defunding police, we're going to have to shut down jails. And where do those people go? They go right back into society. Is the money going to be allocated to rehabilitation for restorative justice? Is it? I think that even if we were to start tomorrow we're multiple years away from the idea of that being a success. So we have to keep our presence out there. And it's kind of like, to me, a small child who acts out in a grocery store. If the mother or guardian doesn't take action, then that action for that child is learned behavior, and it'll be an action that is deemed by that child to be appropriate. And so if we have criminals who we don't hold accountable, then that action is going to be tolerated. And so defunding police is absolutely not the answer.
Do you think there's an opportunity for optimism for conservatives, for Republicans coming out of this, that maybe there is a heightened awareness of the importance of law and order and law enforcement, that maybe coming into this next election season we have an opportunity to capitalize on that if we play our cards right?
I think that we have to pay attention. I think that everyone has to pay attention and everyone's voice matters. And for anyone who believes that if I sit back it's going to take care of itself, or anyone who believes that others will do it for me, because we fall into that. Well, we have the doers. The doers are going to do, right? But we have to have people awakened. And the voices of the multitudes will be heard. We're always categorized into the silent majority because we just feel as if it's going to work itself out. And our voice has always been heard at the ballot. The reality of it is that we have to become a unified group in a unified force, one that is many deep that will be heard. And so I would tell anybody who is thinking, well, I go to the meetings, I go to events, and I'm going to stay home and let them take care of it, we're going to be in a whirlwind of hurt because the others are not doing that. And so I would encourage people to be a voice, to write letters, to go to meetings, to go to their Board of Supervisors meetings, to run for elected positions. Take a look at many of our cities up and down the state of California and what is happening in our cities. It's time for people to stand up and become an elected. If you believe in change, don't sit back and wait for someone else to do it. So I would really encourage people to be the voice and get out, because now it's more important than any other time in history, I believe. If you look at the categories of communism and how to change a country into communism, look at the categories. I want to say there's 25 to 30 different categories, and we are living each of these categories. It talks about overtaking the media and controlling the media. It talks about taking over local elected positions, local school districts, city councils, board of supervisors, sheriffs, DAs. It talks about all that and how to control a society. I have to tell you, we're living it right now.
Right.
And so, fear is a very powerful thing, but we don't want fear to push us into silence either.
Right. In my most recent president's message, I talked about the silent majority. And even personally, I fell into that because I would rationalize that, well, I'm going to lay low right now and wait for another opportunity that can come when I can have a reasoned conversation with someone. So I'm going to sit back for now until that other time presents itself. And I think as you see what's unfolded across the country and all these different narratives, it is crystal clear that now's the only time. We cannot wait, we cannot sit back, and we can no longer rely on a silent majority. If that majority exists, you better speak up. You better do what Sheriff Boudreaux was talking about and take the initiative to show up and be heard, because if we don't, what do we have left? We always just wait to voice our opinion at the ballot box, and yet now we even see across the country, how much can we rely on the integrity of that system? And we know that there's forces coming against our election integrity with mail-in ballots for all and all of that. So I definitely agree with that idea that we all have to come together and be a united front and a united voice in these issues. We appreciate the work that you're doing here in Tulare County. We appreciate that you are vocal about those ideas and positions, and
I think I can speak for Fresno County and City Republican Women Federated when I say you have our full support
Thank you very much.
as well.
I
And
appreciate it.
again, thank you for everything that you have stood up for, that you have done throughout these last few trying months, and just continue the good fight.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, well, women, again, we want to thank Sheriff Boudreaux for joining us. You can look forward to more of these types of interviews coming in the months ahead as we meet with our intended speakers, but still want to bring you those messages. So, again, thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we will see you, hopefully, very soon.